Hey guys, welcome back to another video on the channel, another miniature game. And this afternoon I don't have the best of news for all of you. Daniel Narodistsky, 29 years old, one of America's best grandmasters, a 2600 player, could have gone even better if he hadn't dedicated his life to studying and commentating. An important YouTuber, streamer, great educator. He passed away 2 days ago, suddenly, at a very young and tender age, 29 years old. So I would like to bring to you guys, out of respect and as a remembrance, one of his best miniature games. I scanned his file on the database, found quite a few interesting ones, and this is the one I thought would represent best his style of play, his aggressive style of play. If you want more information on the details concerning his sudden death, Twitter is basically full of information. It's also been picked up a lot by media news. It's not my place here to talk about that. What I will say is that as far as I am able to, as I was able to know about him, he seemed to me a fabulous, great guy, very learned, very educated, a great teacher, and a great person. I have the feeling I did get to interview him once, although I couldn't find the interview, but it seems to me I did interview him once, but I didn't really know him personally. But I have seen a lot of his material, and it seemed to me that he was a very nice guy. And also most of the people who I've seen who knew him personally and were friends with him, not one bad word over him. So really it's a pity that he's left us so soon at such an age. Anyway, let's go with the game, and hoping that you will enjoy it. And yeah, remembering Daniel Narodistsky. Okay, so this game was played in 2011 in the USA Under-20 Championship with the white pieces, Troff. Now, Caden is a grandmaster nowadays, a very strong player. Back then, he was only rated 2250, which is also really quite good. But the year after this game, Troff became world under-14 champion. So he was clearly underrated at this moment. Daniel, I think, was 1 or 2 years older than Caden, and he was already rated 2472. So he was a very strong international master, striving for his grandmaster norms. Now, Narodistsky, throughout his whole career, would always play the King's Indian defense. Sometimes he would start off with G6, sometimes he would start off with knight F6, but the King's Indian was one of his favorite defenses, and in fact, it's a very good defense. I also have the King's Indian in my repertoire, and I bring it out every now and then if I want to play for a win with black. Top level players nowadays who always play the King's Indian, of course, we have to look at Rajapov, maybe Dinglinen. Grishuk is a very good King's Indian player. Nakamura, for many years, probably the best modern age King's Indian players. And then many other grandmasters on the second tier, 2600 players, a lot of them have the King's Indian and the Perk, which are sort of like brothers, in their repertoire when they want to play for a win with black. And then if we go back in time, of course, Bobby Fischer, Garry Kasparov, all these players, aggressive players with black, used to have the King's Indian in their repertoire as their main weapon, so they could fight for a win with black and white. So this is the four pawns attack, very dangerous if we don't know what we're doing. Of course, Daniel does know what he's doing, and he normally would play here c5. Sorry, I'm messing around with the board here. He would normally play either c5 or castle. These are the moves that he would normally play. But for this game, he brought an interesting idea, bishop to d4. Not totally correct, but then again, most of the moves of the King's Indian are not totally correct. So you really need to try and get your opponent out of the comfort zone. Now by hitting the queen, he's either forcing Kaiden to play knight to f3, against which he'd capture and start attacking the d4 pawn. This is the idea, theoretical idea that Daniel had for this game. I think he wanted to get Kaiden out of his territory. Of course, Kaiden could have played pawn takes here, but possibly Kaiden thought that he wouldn't be a player who would voluntarily surrender his pawn structure so early in the opening. So it was a sort of like a semi-gambit, no, sort of like a bluff, see what he could do. I've also checked that bishop e2 would have been very sensible, and also queen to c2 is okay. I think bishop e2 overall is probably the best move, and here I'm thinking that Daniel would have captured, and here maybe the move e5, I'm not totally sure, or maybe castle first, and then after castle maybe go for c5 or e5, one of these two pawn launches. Of course, having exchanged a piece, play is just slightly easier for Narodistsky, but always white has a very slight edge in these positions out of the opening. But this is an interesting line to play against the four pawns if you are a King's Indian player. Troff went astray very quickly. He played queen to b3, trying to take advantage of the sortie of the bishop, hitting the pawn on b7. But this is very dangerous, and Daniel had it all worked out. He played knight to c6, attacking the d4 pawn. He doesn't mind sacrificing on b7 because after knight takes d4, he has a threat on c2, which is tremendously dangerous. Also, the queen here could be in some trouble at some point. Kaiden opted to play bishop to e3, protecting the pawn. And now, of course, you have to play with the initiative. So Daniel played e5, with the idea of sticking the knight in d4, which is a typical idea in the King's Indian. After bishop takes, pawn takes, here black is doing very well. The knight is under attack. e4 is falling. After castling, there is big trouble here for white. So Kaiden took the bull by the horns and captured on b7, allowing pawn takes pawn, and maybe he'd calculated originally to capture the knight on c6, bishop to d7, queen to a6, d takes c3, b takes c3, and then he realized that after knight takes e4, he has a lot of trouble defending this pawn here. Because after bishop to d4, there's a very good move, which is queen to e7, with the idea bishop takes g7, a lovely knight to c5, capturing the queen because of this check. He might not have seen this idea initially when he captured on b7 and then spotted it in his calculations. So instead of capturing the knight, he played first knight to b5. And now he has a double threat, the knight on c6 and the pawn on c7. But of course, Daniel, in his element here, he goes castle, queen takes knight, and pawn takes e3. And although he hasn't picked up the knight on c3, but white's position is very dangerous here. Look, the king is still in the center. The pawn on e4 is under attack. The bishop will open up to attack g7. Even the bishop on g4 is preventing the long castle. So this is very troublesome. And also the pawn on e3 could easily become a weapon in the attack. Okay, so for example, queen takes c7. Here, maybe bailing out, but we are going to be down a huge amount of material. This is definitely a technical win for black, but maybe this was the way to go. Who knows? Troff played knight c3, trying to protect on e4. Rook b8, hitting b2, another typical idea. Rook b1, protecting, would be met by knight to h5, hitting f4 and hitting c3 as well. So Troff sacked the pawn on b2 and long castled, very risky, but trying to win a tempo, hitting the rook, hitting the bishop, and maybe, only maybe, going for e5 as well. But queen to b8 nips this all in the bud. He gets away out of the X-rays of the rook, threatens his own entrance along the b file, protects the rook. Everything is working for black here. Notice how the pawn on e3 controls d2. This is going to be important now. h3, another sacrifice, knight takes e4, fantastic. If the knight is recaptured with the queen, then bishop takes c3, and the game is completely lost. There's no way white is getting back from here. Whereas knight takes e4 was met by check, check, another check on a3, and now white is getting mated. If he had gone back to c2, then the mate is very academic and even boring. So Troff obviously sacked his knight on c3 and started a king up the board. So there's going to be a king hunt here. Check, 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 and mate. So this was Narodisky's wonderful miniature at a very tender age. I think both of the players, as I said before, were under 16, under 14. This was the USA under 20 in championship in St. Louis in 2011. And this is my small and simple and very humble homage to what Daniel has left all of us, especially his online teaching and streaming, his commentary, his wit, his humor, his kindness. I think we're all going to miss this, especially for those of you out there who are or were close friends of his family, the community around Charlotte where he lived and worked, and in general all the American players, all my American followers. This is basically for all of you guys, hoping that you'll enjoy it and also improve in your game. That's the reason why we teach these miniature games, to try and improve in openings and tactics and strategy. So see you all guys in my next video, and hope you enjoyed this one.